Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. Thank you so much for tuning in. I just love doing these podcasts with you and sharing information. And it's amazing too, because there are so many families that still are not necessarily aware of the impact of certain elements of child development. And they're pivotal. They're so important in understanding, especially if you want to get to the root of a problem. So today I'm titling this one Primitive Reflexes. I know I have talked a lot about primitive reflexes in the past, but I'm going to do a deeper dive. I'm going to bring it all together versus pulling one reflex here, one reflex there, so that we can really have a resource that we can share so people can understand. And I'm going to try to also make it a little interactive, meaning I can go over to the internet and show you how to look at these things so that you can have some information as well. So there's a known label of sensory motor issues, correct? Okay. Well, we have to realize that many things precede certain other developments. So sensory motor is after central pattern generators. Reflexes fall into the category of central pattern generators. Now, just break that word down. I can remember in chiropractic school, medical terminology was one of the classes that really helped me break things down and understand what they mean rather than just a bunch of words that nobody knows what in the world they actually are trying to define. So, central, we're going to talk about the central nervous system. What is the regulator of everything? So, we have the central nervous system, we have the peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system, and then there's other ones. There's ones that they're going to identify down into the gut. There's a lot of other things that they want to call systems, okay? But what we're talking about here is the central nervous system. So this means something that canopies everything. It includes all other systems. Now, patterns. I've used that word before too. We are beings of pattern. Even if you were to stop and think of yourself, I'm a creature of habit. It's a pattern. And what do you do on a regular basis? How do you move through your life? How you eat, how you plan, every part of your life can become habitual. But they're patterns. They're things that you have repeated, and you've repeated them enough times that they almost feel automatic. So central, the whole thing, patterns habitual, practiced, generator. Okay, generator. It's literally creating the energy to make the patterns happen in the central system. So they're automatic. It's like it's plugged in. So when we talk about conception of life, we're bringing the egg, the sperm together. Even in the beginning of life, as soon as that egg and sperm comes together, there has actually been seen a light that forms for the life that has been generated. Then there is this incredible cellular multiplying power that is just rapidly pulling all of life together, forming the body that is going to house the life. Now, as we get that life going, and we've got the brain, we've got the head, we've got the buds that are going to grow into arms and legs, we've got the torso. In the very beginning, the very first thing that human life learns how to do is defend itself, survival. So what happens in the womb, and let's create that environment for a second, because it's amniotic fluid and a baby. So there isn't a lot of things in there, right? It's just them, the fluid, the amniotic fluid. Every time the baby moves, there's going to be rippling effect in that fluid. There's going to be vibration. So that very light touch environment is creating a centrally pattern generated expression to be aware how subtle something could happen that would literally potentially be a threat. The way I also like to describe it is, think about all the hair on our body and imagine all the little hair follicles standing up, almost like giving you goosebumps. You feel it all over your body. This is what happens with this withdrawal. It actually begins first in this upper torso under the chin area, and then it manifests all over the body until it includes the arms, the back, the face. So we are able to detect with our senses if there is an impending threat. And then the response is going to be that you're going to pull away. So they are known as the withdrawal reflexes. This is a really important part to understand, because we talk a lot about arousal factors in the brain. And if you happen to be watching this first on the YouTube channel, you notice that I'm sharing my screen, and we're going to talk about the Moro reflex, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Before the Moro kicks in, which is the category of what's known as primitive reflexes, we are first learning that we have to know how to handle anything subtle in our environment. So as a baby, of course, it's going to be easy to understand any type of handling, any type of subtle change in the chemistry, any type of loud noises, anything that baby should spark up. Now, as an adult, so that you understand, you don't just have these reflexes as a baby. You had them to begin to wire up your own nervous system, and you still rely on them today. So what does a grown-up withdrawal reflex look like? Well, if I'm cooking and I skim my arm on a hot pot, I don't sit there and go, wow, my flesh is burning. I pull my arm away, and there's no thought to this whatsoever. It's automatic. If I were to step on something, I would recoil off of it. Now, those are kind of dramatic situations. Wonder if you are out walking your dog and it's late at night and you notice you're the only one that's on the street. Your senses are heightened to be aware of your environment. You'd be picking up, let's say you're walking your dog, and you'd be picking up if your dog, who picks up sounds even greater than you notices something and turns to it, you would automatically look at it too, because initially we must know that we're safe. So this particular reflex is still there working for you. But of course, it's meant to grow up and be mature and handle if the dog looks at something and you look at it and you go, oh, it was just a branch, that you're able to make that distinction between what is a real threat and what isn't a real threat. So let's go back into the world of pediatrics, because I find this reflex still firing at a very high level in almost every single child that I see. And I would tell you the reason for this is because the children are still so close to the beginning of their life. And so there's a couple of possibilities. Perhaps that reflex never integrated like it was supposed to, or perhaps things have been going on for them for a while. And remember, a while can be 3 months. So if it's been going on for a while, it's chronic. And now when things are chronic, we might need to go back to some central pattern generators in order to relearn how to handle something. And this is a crucial element because children are not going to tell you this. They don't have the resources, they don't have the maturation to tell you things are not okay. I'm going to need to go back deep into my brainstem, pull up those reflexes, and begin to retrain my brain. They're going to do it automatically. So remember, there's 5 categories of evaluating children. There's fine motor, gross motor, social communication, and adaptation. Withdrawal reflexes really set up this idea of fine motor, light touch, fine motor, holding your pen with just your tripod grip. There's many elements to fine, but the withdrawal reflex is fine motor because of the environment in which it was initiated. Therefore, the firing potential is wired together. What fires together, wires together. And so as this child tries to navigate, they're going to be constantly tripped up. Now, adaptation is ensuring that your child is growing up, is moving forward. But it could be coming at a cost. And if these reflexes are still firing, it is coming at a cost. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Coming at a cost means I am being driven by my brain stem, because that's where these reflexes are, rather than my maturation process beginning to yield to the midbrain and the higher brain. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't use your brain stem for anything, because you do. Your brain stem has all your cranial nerves in them, and your cranial nerves go to everything, like your eyes, your ears, your nose, how you smell, how you taste, touch. It goes everywhere. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve, and it goes to every organ of your body. So it's not that you don't use your brain stem, but it now should shift to automatic pilot. Also, how you breathe, how your heartbeat rhythm is moving along, like your pulse rate. All of those things are regulated by your brainstem, but it's automatic. You don't tell your heart to beat. You don't tell your lungs to inflate and deflate. It does it automatically. So there's a degree of surrendering. The automatic pilot's going to take over, and I'm going to move up to my brain, to my midbrain, and then eventually up into my higher brain. So a child that is still holding on to withdrawal reflexes has really high distractibility. They are constantly looking at anything that's coming into their system. So imagine I'm sitting in school and I can see out the window and a bird flies by. I'm looking at it. A kid drops his pencil 2 seats behind. I'm looking at it. If there's something uncomfortable on my skin, I'm moving around. So that's one of the biggest ones. Now, it also can cause other reflexes to continue firing. It can also be associated with high emotional dysregulation because, again, my defense system has been on constantly, and I'm in this fight or flight constantly. So now I have been training my brain to know this pattern, and anything that looks like it might take effort, I'm going to break down and have a meltdown. And we see this all the time as well. And what is so alarming to me is that this stuff about development has been known forever, but we still want to label these kids and we want to treat only the label. So I'm not judging you for anything that you've ever decided to go do and get some kind of diagnosis on something, but you got to ask yourself, what is triggering this? Because it is not innate in us to not be able to self regulate. And this particular reflex is at a heightened level of causing so much chaos in a little person. And there is a very simple approach in helping the reflexes integrate. But if you ever do any type of reflex integration work, I must encourage you that you finish it. You don't want to start down a path of working on a child's neurology and then stop because you can get them stuck somewhere else. Also, I would encourage you, make sure whoever you're working with, if you're not coming to CMB, that they really do know how to work these different elements of development. There's individuals that want to go and work on every single one of the key parts of the body at the same time, and you cannot do that. You have to work one area at a time. And you have to watch your child to see how they respond. And it is not just checking a box. You have to allow that child to begin to do this integration for themselves, to fully get down at that root and be able to pull it out, get it moving forward so that that child can move forward. We can't just push a timeline. We have to allow the child to do this work because they were the ones that were doing it at the beginning of their life, and so were you. We can't do it for them. They have to be able to do this for themselves. Now, we make a transition around 9 weeks of pregnancy, and we go into what's called the primitive reflexes. And there are many, many primitive reflexes. And there are some that actually start in the womb. And then there are some that are actually going to be linked to more of what's called postural reflexes once the child is born and the work of the primitives while in the womb has completed their timeline. So there's many, many of them. So today what I want to do is I want to show you the very first one. This is the one that I have built so much of this practice on. And I would also say the withdrawals. And I typically refer to the Moro reflex as the enchilada of all reflexes. I've never met a child who still had retained primitive reflexes that also did not have a Moro reflex. And as we go through it, I think you will understand. So I'm going to go ahead and play this little video. Now, it's a bit aggressive, but the baby's in a pediatrician's office and they're definitely showing a drastic way to test the Moro reflex. And I don't believe you have to go this drastic, but what he's doing for my podcast audience is he's holding up the baby, and the baby is moving because he is letting that baby drop a bit. All right, let me go back. I have kind of lost my picture. Let's see if I can go back. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now we're back on that picture. Okay. He's holding the baby up and he has the baby supported, and it's absolutely a newborn. And he lets the baby lay back and get very close to the examination table. And then he lets the baby drop maybe about an inch, inch and a half. It's not like a full drop. But because it's a sudden change in position, that baby goes into the arm extended and the legs extended. So a newborn is in flexion. And when this reflex is elicited, it goes into extension. So we go from flexion, extension, and then the baby will actually come back to flexion. Now, there is another physiological event that's going on at the same time. When the Moro is elicited, the baby takes a big, deep breath, and then the baby exhales slower when it comes back into that start position. Moro activates three things in our neurology. And remember, these are central pattern generators. It's wiring and firing together the things that are going to work together for the lifetime of the human being. So the first one, again, is arousal. Does the baby actually have that response because of a sudden change in position? And it's not just related to position. It's sudden change in anything. Okay. So transition is a huge word for Moro. Sudden change is a huge word for Moro. So anytime somebody has an issue with transition, I want you to think about the Moro reflex. Anytime somebody is responding to a sudden change in light, temperature, handling, sound, any of those special senses, to where that it is eliciting not necessarily that full-blown startle response, but it could just even be their little arms shaking. It could just be a little tremor in their body. But if a newborn cannot transition from the womb to the environment that they're living in, it literally is causing a fight or flight response, because that is also one of the things that it is central pattern generating in the nervous system of a human being. So it is arousal, it is sympathetic nervous system, and it's also the beginning of what we call heart rate variability, which is that big lusty inhale with a slow exhale, which eventually in the adult will be known as the gold standard for measuring stress. Everything that you do can be related back to these reflexes. In addition, this reflex is going to regulate, especially for the newborn, CO2 and O2 in the body. And I've mentioned this before. When we have babies that are under aroused, that baby would not get the signal properly to their brain that there's too much CO2. And because of Moro generating that big inhale, they won't take that and they won't get more oxygen into their body. And what could possibly happen is this baby could literally get too much CO2, which would cause them to drift off into a deep sleep. And if nobody was alerted, there is the potential that that child could pass. And that is what is known as SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. So look at the components of survivability. These reflexes are wired in order to make the nervous system work the way that they're supposed to. So those three things, you can see why I would refer to Moro reflex as the enchilada of all reflexes. Now, again, I've told you there are so many reflexes. So let's also, I did this the other day for a family to look at things like AT&R and attention. So if you just simply do some searches, AT&R, this will give you a development. This is asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. This is a primitive reflex. It is happening during the womb experience. It splits the body in half while it's setting up lateral columns in the brain, which will eventually have to learn how to communicate from one side of the brain to the other. For example, the need to talk is on the right, the work of talk is on the left. They get laid down in this lateralization process. And the AT&R set the brain up to learn how to do that. And then when that little one crawls, that's when that information is literally going from one side to the other and learning how to make both sides of the brain communicate. It's also responsible for teaching near far vision in the beginning and training those eyeballs to team together so that your child can see and read. So this is why these are not behaviors. We can absolutely have something that did not get wired properly. But the earlier that we get to this, it makes a dramatic change in moving that child along, getting to the root cause, getting that reflex integrated, still working on the things that they're doing right now and what's expected of them, like being able to learn how to read and do math and sit still and enjoy learning. I met a little girl yesterday and I said, "What is your what's the part of school that you really don't like?" She goes, "The whole thing. I don't like school." Can you imagine being that little and not enjoying school? That's a red flag. That says, "Man, I'm just not happy." And somebody hasn't found out what's going on inside of me that's not working right. That's literally creating an obstacle for learning. And more importantly, It's patterning this dislike in her brain, which is ramping up the right side of her brain more, because the right side of the brain is our emotional quotient, but also connected more to the things that make us unhappy. So the more that I practice that pattern of thought, I am literally burying that into my brain, and it's going to be harder. The older she gets, it's going to be harder to break that pattern. So you can also, oops, I didn't spell attention right. Sorry about that. I wonder if you caught me. Okay, let's also look at moro and sleep. So you can see, let's put moro reflex in there. So moro reflex and sleep. So again, there's our little video we saw before. Look at the amount of information that's now available about primitive reflexes. I can tell, I've been working on primitive reflexes for 28 years. And you cannot believe how hard it was to find information about these reflexes when I first started. But there is an abundance of information. But what I am going to ask you to do, I don't want you to just go look up information for sure, but don't just start down a path of trying to integrate a reflex that has to do with neurology and wiring the nervous system without working with someone, so that you make sure that you do it correctly. Even here at CMB, we put a notebook together. We put dates that we review the notebooks with our parents. But parents are still human beings, and they still need that support. And they still ask questions. Am I doing it right? And we even have it set up here because we stay in a particular area in the withdrawal reflex integration work, that parents are to email me every 3 days and let me know what you see, so that I can guide you if your child is actually ready to move up to the next level of intensity for that particular area. We guard the reflexes in this office because they are a real bucket tipper. In fact, I always say to my parents, if you're ever looking at your child, scratching your head and saying, what's going on? I want you to think reflexes, and you got to communicate with me. So the last set of reflexes that come on board, well, I bet we're going to find more too as time goes on, but we'll talk about the third area. And this area is called the postural reflexes. So I'm going to share my screen again. Here we go. And so I want you to look up these as well. So let's jump over here to images for a minute. So we have postural reflexes. Trying to find a good picture. So here again, that's our pediatrician we were looking at before, but he's showing the parachute, so that if I were thinking I was about to fall, I've got it hardwired in my central pattern generators that I'm going to reach out with my hands and I'm going to stop my fall. Now, we also have postural reflexes that we are using when, as we transition from being on the ground as a baby to being upright. Okay, so babies go through lots of different structural changes. Their heads are really big, their bodies are little, they're growing neurons up in their brain. When they go to stand up, which is typically around 10 months, don't go beyond that. If your child is not standing up, now this is supported standing. They should be, let me use a different word. They should be pulling themselves up around 10 months. And they literally go and hold themselves up at different pieces of furniture. They bounce into their joints because they're preparing proprioceptively for those joints to be able to then walk. Okay. So around 12 months is then when they go and start taking their steps. Now, when your baby was born, you got very excited when your baby started to lift its head. And that's an important part in a neurological assessment, is making sure that head moves with the body. So head lag is a red flag when that head doesn't come with the body. Now the head is already starting to lay down postural reflexes inside that nervous system. The head is going to dictate where the body is going to go. It was already doing this in the womb. So for example, with ATNR, I turn my head, asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, I turn my head and my arm reflexively goes out. My head is controlling the movement for my arms and legs. So it's already been laid down initially, and now we're going to start practicing it in gravity. Then, as we fast forward, we look at a little baby when they begin to stand up, and their legs are typically wider because they're creating a surface area space so that as they navigate that big head, they're like a little teeter-totter. And this way, they're creating that balance. And then as they begin to shoot up, those legs will actually turn in because long bones cannot keep up. Muscles cannot keep up with the speed of the long bone growth at that time. So there's postural changes, but the legs should never look different from one side over the other. So if you're ever questioning that, you get it checked out. Then these postural reflexes, they're yours. They're yours for life. And those are based on how are you doing in gravity. Adaptation. Remember, we talked about that word at the beginning. How are you adapting to gravity? Do you have a head tilt? Do you have one hip or one pelvis that's higher than the other? Do you have one shoulder that's higher than the other? If you looked at the eyeballs, straighten the head out. Look at the eyeballs. Are the eyeballs symmetrical? Children literally go through big head growth. And by age 1, they start with a cute little round head. And by age 1, they actually get their chin. And there's lots of changes in the position of the eustachian tube of the ear. We can already begin to pick up how is your child adapting to gravity. And flat feet and bowed in legs and little ankles that are, close to touching the floor. These are red flags. This is telling us I'm really not adapting in gravity like I'm supposed to. So what would that look like as that child is developing? They're very, very nervous about any kind of unstable surface. These are the kids that they absolutely probably tried to ride their little bicycle, but they fell off and they're not going back on because they're already afraid of falling. Your child could be walking on their toes. That's actually another primitive reflex known as tonic labyrinthine reflex. This is why I can tell you there's never one reflex that's just kind of out there still firing all by itself. They work together. They create a network of information, and they're going to rely together in order to keep that nervous system moving forward. So this is just a little bit of kind of an overview of that whole reflexive system. Everybody has them. Everybody was supposed to have them. They are not pathological until you get older. So let's say you've had a stroke, a heart attack. Your brain will go back into that brainstem and begin to relearn how to do certain things. I've seen it where I've been working even on my own mother who had a stroke many years ago. And when I put my fingers in her hands, she went right back into a palmar reflex. And today she's literally lost the ability to have her hand open. That reflex, that nerve damage from the stroke and lack of rehab has literally shut down that nerve and put it back into its primitive state. If you see your child with their thumb inside of their palm, this is a stress response. I'm trying to give you all kinds of different little pearls to help you have bigger eyes to see. But if you ever have a question, is this right? Should my child be doing this? Should my child be doing that? Are they possibly tied to why my child has meltdowns? Reach out. On our website, we have a form, and you can send me a message and I will respond. Let me know when you are available so that we can cut down the back and forth. Lots of times you'll send these forms in and I reach out. I respond to everyone, but sometimes I don't hear from you. Why? If you're going to make a change, you got to take those steps. Summertime is the best time. Give your child this season to get their nervous system online the way that it's supposed to so that they can start the next school year ready to go. Go visit our website, connectmybrain.com. Feel free to call the office, 678-501-5172. Thanks for tuning in and be blessed.